Hello and welcome back to the Consistory of the Coke YouTube channel. I'm your host for this video, Reverend Zabel of St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church, located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia, member congregation of the Confessional Orthodox Evangelical Lutheran Communion, commonly called the COELC. And today we're doing our Ask the Consistory series, looking at the question of the age of accountability. Now, I often hear people say, this is found nowhere in Scripture. And technically correct. The actual doctrine of the age of accountability is an unscriptural doctrine. Now, this doesn't mean that there's not Bible verses that the Baptists and those who support the age of accountability like to use to defend it. Now, firstly, for those who don't know what the age of accountability is, essentially the simplest way I can explain this is that Baptists believe that since they equate faith with reason, therefore, if you're an infant and you haven't got the rationalistic knowledge to understand and confess the faith, then they say you can't be saved by faith. But that there's this age of accountability where God just kind of lets anybody under that age just kind of get free access to heaven, essentially. And the main Bible verse for this comes from the book of Isaiah, where when we have the prophecy of Emmanuel, it makes a statement that says, before he is old enough to know right from wrong. And so this is one of their proof texts. Like, so see, this child won't know right from wrong until a certain age. Therefore, before that, they are not accountable for their sins before God. However, there's many problems with such an argument, and the first main argument is, when does ignorance of the law equate to innocence of the law? If you don't know God's law, that doesn't make you innocent before God. Yes, it is true that children won't know right from wrong until they reach a certain age. Yes, there is some kind of rationality equated with them being able to know right from wrong. However, knowledge of sin and ignorance of sin doesn't necessarily negate punishment for sin. If you don't know God's law, you will still be held accountable to it. So, if you have an infant who is not old enough to know right from wrong, their ignorance does not excuse their sin before God. And the thing is, we are all born in bondage to sin. We are born as slaves to sin, dead in our trespasses, enemies of God. The thing is, we are all born evil. We are born with original sin. As David teaches in the Psalm, he was conceived in sin. Generally, learning right from wrong is we then learn how to do right. We kind of know how to do wrong. It's that we then learn how to do good. We're kind of the inverse of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were created perfect, only knowing how to do right, and then once they ate the forbidden fruit, they now knew good and evil. They already knew how to do good. Once they ate the fruit, they now knew how to do evil. Humans are conceived as sinners. We know how to do evil. We need to be taught how to do good. And see, this is the big thing. We are already sinners. It doesn't matter whether we understand that or not. Ignorance of God's law does not mean innocence before the law. But all this really stems from the fact that the Baptists say that faith is reason, that you must rationally think. Now, there is a knowing reason. In Lutheranism, we generally talk about the two types of faith. Directive faith, which is kind of the unconscious faith, that it's kind of this just sense of trusting and believing in God, whereas the reflexive faith is the conscious faith, the one you can think about. And this is the reality, as Dr. Pieper in his Dogmatics talks about, that directive faith is the faith that you always have. It's something that's ingrained into you, even when you're an infant and you don't understand it, or if you're mentally disabled and you don't understand it, or even when you're asleep, or even when you're awake and you're not consciously thinking about it. Like, faith isn't this conscious thought that, yes, I believe in God, and then I'm like, oh, cool, There's a tree over there. I'm thinking, oh no, I stopped thinking about God for a second because I was thinking about that tree. No, you don't lose faith because you're not consciously thinking about it. Faith is more something that is in you. It's that sense of trust. It's more than just the thought of, yes, I believe in God. And we know that faith is more than just the thought about God because, as James tells us, even the demons believe in God. They know there's a God, and yet they don't have faith in God. Faith is not the same thing as knowledge. There is, yes, a knowledge of God, as you get this in Proverbs, where Solomon will connect fear of the Lord with knowing God, and fear of the Lord with trusting God, and trust with faith. So there is a sense of knowing God connected with faith. But faith is more than just a rationalistic reason. And so the other thing that needs to be considered here is also if the idea that, okay, well, God's going to give this age of accountability and the kids, they're not held guilty against this until they reach a certain age. Well, why are the infants? Why not mentally disabled people? Why not pagans and those who have never heard about God? And if that was the case, if ignorance of God's law meant innocence, then we shouldn't preach God's law to anybody. But that'd be wrong either, because not only are we called to go forth and preach, but actually we're also told in Scripture that everybody knows God's law because God's law is written into nature. Therefore, as Paul says in Romans, they are without an excuse. Therefore, we need to go to them with the gospel so that they can hear the word of gospel. Everybody hears the word of law by the fact of just living in the natural world. It's the gospel that needs to be brought to people. And the gospel can be received even by infants. In fact, even better than by adults, because Jesus tells us that if you want to go to heaven, you must have the faith of a child. And the actual word child there is not like a little 5-year-old, it's the word paidia. It means an infant that has not been weaned yet. It means it has to be at least under the age of 2 or 3. That word is normally reserved for little baby infants. The exact ones that the Baptists say can't have faith because they don't have reason. But Jesus says you must have faith like them. Jesus says they can have faith. Not to mention all the other cases of things like David saying that he believed in God and he knew God from the time of his mother's breast. That's even David uses the word knowing God. He knows God and he trusts God from the time of his mother's breast, as he writes in the Psalm. We also have Jeremiah in that, talking about how God chose him to be a prophet and how he knew God like when he was being knit together in the womb. And of course we have the perfect example of John the Baptist, who in the womb jumps for joy and believes in Jesus, who at that point in time was also just in the womb. Infants can do quite a lot. They can believe quite a lot. No, they don't have the same rationalistic faith that we have, but they do have that saving faith, which is the most important part. And yeah, so there are verses in Scripture that the Baptists would like to use to defend the doctrine of the age of accountability, but ultimately it is just an unscriptural doctrine. It is not in accordance with the rest of Scripture. If you want to take that one passage from the book of Isaiah that says he doesn't know right from wrong and try and base a doctrine on that, well, then I would encourage the Baptists to learn the Lutheran principle of Scripture interprets Scripture. That we don't just cherry pick verses wherever we feel like, but that we actually read verses in the wider context of all of Holy Scripture. So I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.